The ranch had never felt this silent, not even after sundown, when the horses stopped moving, and the wind died against the fences. And yet when she stood there barefoot against the barn wall, lifting the hem of her torn dress to reveal a bruised knee, the silence felt heavier than judgment, heavier than shame, heavier than the money he'd placed on the table hours earlier. She didn't look at him when she said the words that cut deeper than any accusation. "You paid for me." Now do it, because looking at him would mean admitting she wasn't just a transaction, and he wasn't just a rancher trying to buy one night of forgetting. And as he stood there frozen, hands rough from years of work, heart pounding harder than any gallop he'd ever chased across his land, he realized he hadn't come here for what the town whispered men came here for. He'd come because loneliness makes deals that pride never would, because grief empties a man until he mistakes ownership for control. And when he finally spoke, his voice wasn't command but conflict, because nothing about the way she stood, defiant, wounded human, felt like something money should ever touch. And yet the contract existed. The cash was spent and the night waited, forcing a choice that would change both of them forever. Soft subscribe CTA woven naturally. If you feel the tension already tightening, don't forget to subscribe, because this story is only beginning, and what comes next will shock you. He didn't cross the distance immediately, because some lines once stepped over never let you return. And when he finally did, it wasn't dominance that moved him but surrender, to the moment, to the consequences, to the lie that this was simple. And what happened between them was never spoken aloud afterward, not because it was wild or scandalous, but because it was heavy with contradiction, filled with pauses, with breath held too long, with the terrible knowledge that two strangers were colliding under false names and borrowed courage. And when dawn crept across the ranch and painted the fences gold, she dressed in silence, her expression unreadable, leaving behind not relief but residue, something lodged in his chest that no amount of work could shake. And as she walked away down the dirt road, he told himself this was the end, just another mistake buried beneath the dust of a man's life until the following week, when a single sentence overheard in town would rip open everything. He thought he understood. It happened in the feed store of all places, when gossip flowed freer than grain, and he froze mid-step as he heard her name spoken not with pity or rumor, but with certainty. She left her husband last month. Poor woman. And the word husband landed like a gunshot, because suddenly the night wasn't just complicated, it was catastrophic, and every memory rewound itself with new meaning. Her hesitation, her anger, the way she'd looked at him not as a client, but as a witness to something breaking inside her. And when he confronted her later, the truth spilled out not as confession but collapse, because she hadn't sold herself, she'd been running, escaping a marriage that had reduced her to silence. And now the worst damage wasn't what he'd done, but what he'd unknowingly helped destroy, because somewhere out there was a man who still believed she belonged to him. And the rancher finally understood that paying the price had never meant owning the moment, it meant inheriting the fallout. When the husband arrived at the ranch, rage disguised as righteousness, demanding answers, demanding his wife, demanding blood if necessary, the rancher didn't hide, didn't deny, didn't excuse himself with money or ignorance. Because real men don't run from the truth even when it costs them everything. And what followed wasn't violence, but something far more dangerous, honesty. And as the woman stood between two men representing the life she fled and the mistake she survived, she made the only choice that was ever hers to make, walking away from both, leaving behind a rancher who finally understood that doing something because you can is never the same as doing it because you should. And as the dust settled and the ranch returned to its quiet, the story didn't end with love or redemption, but with awareness, the kind that scars, the kind that teaches, the kind that lingers long after the credits fade. Strong closing CTA. If this story made you feel something, conflict, regret, truth, subscribe now, because the next story goes even deeper, and you won't want to miss what's coming.